So thank you all for joining us today. Happy to announce that we have Dr. Mike Saylor as a presenter for you. Mike is a 30-year IT cyber veteran with 24 years as a professor of cyber and digital forensics and incident response, currently at the University of Texas, San Antonio. He's a 24-year Infragard member, past president, current healthcare sector chief, and a Fusion Liaison officer for the North Texas Fusion Center. Current CEO and incident response lead for Blackswan Cybersecurity. Thank you for joining us, Mike.
Well, thanks for joining us today. I just completed, it took about a year to complete a qualitative case study on I think I've figured out or came to find were some of the causes for the cybersecurity workforce gap, or what is it that's keeping organizations that need cyber from hiring or finding and then hiring the right resources for those cyber jobs. So one of the things that I want to point out as far as my background goes is it gives me the unique kind of multi dimensional perspective of the problem. I've been in IT, I've been a job seeker, I've been a hiring manager looking for the right people. I've been an educator trying to educate the next generation of cyber into the workforce. I've run intern and apprentice programs. I've been a trainer. I've been a member of these associations where we see the strength, the struggle and the pain of the workforce, but also the educators. So I've had this involvement in this problem from a lot of different perspectives for a long time. And so, it's on one of the slides. It's actually one of my, I came to this study with a little bit of a bias, thinking maybe I already knew the answer or felt strongly about one perspective or the other. So as we all know, demand for cyber has long been reportedly greater than the supply. And I don't know how you guys feel with regard to that. Maybe we can touch on that, towards the end, or feel free to kind of chime in the chat. But as of 2021, it was actually a study done by ISC2. The cyber workforce the shortage was estimated at almost 3 million vacant jobs globally, with about 400,000 just in North America. So that study is a couple of years old, but I don't think the problem's gotten any better. There's thousands upon thousands of experienced, capable, and skilled people ready to work. They're just being filtered out by the hiring process due to the lack of, maybe the lack of a minimum qualifications like experience or a degree, or that they're self-disqualifying because, the job posting says engineer and they're an analyst. So they don't think they fit that job, or they're self-disqualifying because it says requires a degree and they don't have one, or a certification, so they're not even applying for those jobs. The study also investigated the issues causing the shortage, specifically the job applicant screening practices. And prior studies had findings, and one of the things that I'll note and may come up in another slide is I reviewed over 50 prior cybersecurity workforce studies over the last 5 years. And some of those studies had, I think, meaningful observations and recommendations. Most of them found gaps in education. That we're not doing enough to educate the workforce. Career awareness. We don't have enough people because not everybody understands what cyber jobs are or the opportunities. Not enough internal training where organizations are providing cyber training and career path planning and development to their own employees. Diversity was obviously a topic people wanted to touch on. How do we get more minorities, women involved in cyber? And then the workforce component of that. How do we get more people the hands-on experience they need to qualify for those minimum years of experience that a lot of jobs, especially entry-level jobs, require? So the research questions that were in my study, there were 4, and usually studies only have 2, but I wanted to try and be as comprehensive as I could to figure out all the different angles. One of the things I'll touch on, and I'll touch on it again, this was a qualitative study. It wasn't, answer A, B, or C, or on a level of 1 to 10. It was, let's have a discussion. I want open-ended discussion to really get to how people feel and their thoughts and their experience. So the qualitative approach really applies, and you'll see that in these questions. What's the relationship between hiring organizations' requirements for years of job experience and the number of years of experience reported by job applicants? So, where's an alignment there, especially for entry-level jobs? To what extent is the level of education and number of years experience, related experience among entry-level job applicants considered by HR personnel during the candidate selection process? So is that really people talking to people, or is it an automated filter that's reviewing your resume or your application, and you don't even get to talk to a person about your experience and who you are? Question 3, how do hiring managers qualify cyber applicants that don't meet the minimum stated education, certification, or job-related experience levels? In other words, is there some kind of aptitude test or technical test, or even just, like I said, do I even get to talk to somebody about the things that I've done or could do? And then lastly, to what extent do cyber applicants with more than 2 years of experience view the hiring process that requires these minimum qualifications? So, you've been in the job for a while, you've been able to demonstrate your effectiveness or your competency, yet you're still not getting the job because of some, weird misalignment between that entry-level job description and the qualifications that are being required for that job. So I had to base my study on something similar to an audit. What am I auditing you against? So what am I basing this study on? So I had to find something that is, it's been around for a while, it's well established, well maintained, it's got consistent language, it's got some structure to it, so that when I go and review, 1,500 job postings on cyber jobs, what can I compare those job role descriptions and qualifications to? Is there a standard? Is there something that's fairly rigid and structured? And then also when I go and look at an applicant's resume, can I?
That's right. So instead of them seeing this, what they see is a page, the information, the summary, blah, blah, blah.
Can I compare their resume to some standard verbiage? Where's the common language, if you will? So with NICE, there are 7 high-level, and so NICE is the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. It was developed and it's maintained by NIST, CISA, and the NSA, and some other public agencies rely on NICE for their internal processes. So I've come to find out, or to some degree, I already knew that. But NICE defines 7 high-level cybersecurity role groupings that make up 33 specialty areas and a total of 52 cyber work如And then there's this superset of knowledge, skills, and attributes, or KSAs, that, if you just went down this list of the superset of KSAs and you said, I can do this, or I qualify for that, what would come out of that is what roles, like analyst, engineer, threat hunter, forensic investigator, it would help you kind of identify where you would fit from a role perspective based on your KSAs. And then you can flip that and do the opposite. I want this role. Well, then it would tell you these things that you need to achieve and get experience in and be competent in. So that would help you in that career planning. So that was the framework I picked. I had to study, believe it or not, there's dozens of cyber workforce frameworks around the world. I think there's at least 10 in the UK, on the European side. In the US, there's three or four. But NIST and the NICE, even though, as you'll see, very few people, if any, knew about it, it is actually the most widely used in North America. So prior studies, the categories of findings from prior studies indicated that training and education was a problem. The curriculum in higher ed was not aligned with the standard that would then indicate or help give direction on job role, career planning. No workforce component. For the most part, the majority of higher ed, even though they weren't included in the study, and I'll touch on that later. There's co-op opportunities in higher ed, but none of the cyber programs require that you obtain and complete an internship or a co-op as part of your graduation requirements. And one of the things I'll touch on here, and it may come up later, is cyber is not this traditional role. Cyber can't. It's difficult to apply traditional hiring practices when you're looking for a cyber resource. Well, I think that holds true as well on the education side. It's been proven time and time again that the majority of successful cyber people learn those concepts on their own. It's that mentality, that personality, that drive. In a lot of cases, it's the pace of learning, sitting in a classroom versus I can knock this out in the weekend. So the education components shouldn't be approached traditionally either. But the last part of that is, well, how do I prove? How can I demonstrate objectively? So it's not just me saying it, it's a third party, someone else supervised me or could report on my competence that I can apply what I've learned, whether I taught myself or I learned it in a classroom. So that workforce component is critical. Diversity, the lack of awareness for cyber jobs and opportunities among minorities and women. I actually had some statistics. I think the last study I read showed that 26% of the cyber, no, it was 30, a little over 30% of the cyber workforce was minorities. And of that, 26% were women. So it's still a really low number. So definitely opportunity there. But the argument in these prior studies, which I don't agree with, is that they just were unaware of cyber jobs and opportunities. I think that's not the root cause of why minorities and women have a lower percentage as part of the workforce. I think it's mentoring and the internship opportunities. I don't think it's just them saying, I didn't know. That's not the root cause. The root cause is everybody's heard of cyber. How do we foster that interest? And I think that's consistent among just about anybody that wants to get into cyber. Staff development. Organizations, and I touched on this, not effective at communicating internally those cyber opportunities, but also providing the opportunities to upskill and train their own employees, help them develop career paths, but also that acknowledgement. So that the annual review. What do I rank you, rate you against every year as we do your review? How do I know that your analyst one job? You've progressed to analyst two. There's not a standard upon which, other than just me and you talking about your objectives for this year, that I can truly measure you against. Competency assessments, so the ineffective mechanisms or alternative qualifications and performance and skill evaluations. I touched that kind of part of the staff development. And then lastly, the hire requirements versus the candidate qualifications. A lot of studies found just this misalignment between what the job says it is, the job title on whether it's the job description of the person that's already working there or the title on the job posting for a position that I'm trying to hire for. In most cases, if not all cases, we're not well aligned with what the actual job is. So people are applying for the job title, not the job role. And it should, if anything, they should be filtering people on the KSA part, the knowledge, skills, and attributes, not the job title. And if we can't get those two things aligned, or even effectively defining what the KSAs are for a role, this problem, it'll just continue to perpetuate. Last part of this, number 5, a lot of studies found that the traditional hiring process is unrealistic for cyber jobs. In almost 100% of the time, both the hiring organizations and the job applicants felt that the hiring process for cyber jobs were ineffective. So what was my population from which I picked my sample? What was my sample? What materials did I use? And how did I analyze this data? So the population I picked was from North Texas. So there were over 1,500 job postings in just North Texas last year for cyber specific jobs. I discounted any job that didn't include the word cyber. So there was tons of jobs out there that could be attributed to cyber, but it wasn't clear. Not that most of the jobs I picked from were clear anyway. But then also the other part of that sample where the job, again, I wanted to include hiring organizations and job applicants. So I picked, I asked for volunteers from the 2,000 plus members of the North Texas ISSA and the North Texas ISC2 chapters. Initially, I expected to have about 100 participants. I really thought that it was going to take some time to find the themes and be able to tell the story and truly understand what the problem was. But I achieved saturation after the first 10. And saturation means the responses became consistent. So I would ask one participant these questions and their responses were pretty much identical to the others. And so with the help of my study committee, we all believed that I was able to stop after only interviewing 10 participants. So those were 5 hiring organizations and 5 job seekers. I'll touch on some in a future slide, kind of limitations of this study. What could have made it maybe more broad, and have obtained a few other insights or perspectives. I'll touch on that in a minute. I went about this study by so for everybody that volunteered, that qualified, and there were qualifications, they were provided an open-ended questionnaire. Depending on whether you're a hiring organization or a job seeker, your questionnaires were different. And then having time to fill that questionnaire out, or at least think about the questions, we had face-to-face interviews, and those interviews lasted anywhere from 1 hour to 3 hours. And they were all recorded, so transcribed. And then analyzing that data, I used a thematic framework, which requires you to ingest and decompile and recompile. And there was some software called InVivo, which takes transcripts and narratives, and it looks for themes. So kind of like word cloud type stuff. And so with the use of that software and reviewing just hundreds of pages of transcript, came out with, it was probably around 30 codes. Code would be misalignment or non-standard or ineffective, things along those lines. And then you go back and you whittle that down to look for consistencies and duplications, kind of like a dedupe process. But from about 30 codes, I ended up with about 12. And then so from those 12, you then look for themes, like what's the theme? And I ended up with 2 themes, and those themes then led to the observations. Speaking of limitations, influencing factors, and bias, only members of North Texas were considered, both from a hiring organization and a job seeker perspective. So, this problem may have different inputs or results if you expanded that, different parts of the country, for example, where maybe education and the cyber community events and organizations aren't as prevalent or as concentrated. I did not, and it wasn't intentional, just nobody that was selected for this study were members of the public sector. And none were hiring education representatives. One of the things that was interesting is out of the 10 participants, 4 had experience serving on advisory boards in higher education. So there were some perspectives and feedback given related to their thoughts on the higher education component of the problem, but no one from like faculty or administration were included in the study. My bias, I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen this problem and have been kind of in it for a long time. But I overcame this because I'm also very data driven. So I had to give confidence to my study committee that I could overcome this bias because I used to be an auditor and some other things. So they were confident in that. So some responses. So the first couple of, this slide has a couple of charts and graphs on it. And these are the initial responses from the study participants. None of the study participants had access to internships, apprenticeships that would give them the entry-level experience that they are seeing as requirements in job postings. They had to go and figure this out, get a different job that was somewhat similar that they could then somehow just or show similarity between that experience and the experience required in a job posting. You can see here that 20% had a formal process for defining cybersecurity jobs, where whoever the hiring manager was, whether it was HR or IT, they actually put thought into what are the requirements for this job, what are the objectives, and it wasn't just, so it was a formal exercise. The other 80%, they just Googled it. Hey, go hire an analyst. Okay, I'm going to go Google an analyst job description. And they just went with it. Very little, if any, modification. Changed the name on the document, and that was pretty much it. None of the participants were familiar with any cybersecurity workforce frameworks, including the NICE framework. 90% felt that cyber degree programs lacked a standard and were inconsistent. On this topic, one of the statistics I saw in a prior study was that less than 30% of hiring organizations felt there were value in cybersecurity degrees. And it wasn't that they didn't appreciate that people went and got this degree. It was that because there was no standard in what you learned, they would have to put effort into going to that school's website and looking at the content. You know, what's the degree program look like for that degree that's on your resume, to determine if you learned the basics and the concepts that fit them. And so it's not like an accounting degree or a heating and air conditioning degree where, you know, there's this standard. You know, you can get an accounting degree from just about any school, and I can feel confident that you know how to do accounting. Cyber is not that way. For a number of reasons, but one of the fundamental things that came out of this study was that there's no standard. There's no standard for one university or college to teach the same thing across the board, so that when you graduate that program, your concepts and knowledge of the fundamentals and the theories and all that stuff are standardized. 80% felt that job experience was more valuable than a cyber degree. Similar to, you know, kind of feeding off that first finding. 80% felt that cyber job requirements are inaccurate or misaligned. And only 20% acknowledged that having a degree was actually company policy. And so that was like a professional, like a Big Four accounting firm, where everybody in the company has to have a degree, even the receptionist. Hiring managers felt the need that there needs to be a standard for cybersecurity role definition, 100%. They all agreed that the process is broken because there's no standard. And so they're kind of pulling at straws and grasping at air when they're trying to define their job descriptions or feel comfortable in what they're asking for. None of the job applicants received any feedback about why they were filtered out. It wasn't a sorry, you don't have the right number of certifications. You don't have enough experience. You didn't have the degree. So very little opportunity for correction. Like I'm not getting hired, but I don't know why. And so I think a feedback loop is important. So keep that in mind. 100% of hiring managers felt that cybersecurity job screening process was ineffective because a lot of them rely on these automated filters, you know, like Indeed. You answer some questions, you upload your resume, and hopefully I got through whatever criteria they set up, and I can talk to somebody eventually. None of the participants had an alternative applicant screening or qualification method. So none of those competency assessments or even like a pre-screening phone call. Nobody had that. Job seekers who felt cybersecurity experience should be more valuable than a cybersecurity degree. Everybody does. Why? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, from a hiring manager perspective, even if you had a college degree, I'd still need to feel comfortable that you're able to apply what you learned. And so, did you have an internship? And we always ask at Black Swan, we definitely don't take a traditional approach to hiring. We actually look at we don't let a filter show us the resumes. We look at everything. And we're not just looking at your experience or your education. We're looking at what did you put on this paper that you thought was important to us. And then we want to have a call with those people that pass that visual person screening. And we always talk about, all right, so you've got a degree, but you don't have any experience. Tell me about what kind of lab did you build at home? What do you do when you're not in school? What do you do when you're not the bartender at the club or working at the grocery store? What do you do? What books do you read? What lab did you build? What events do you go to? What are your interests? And if they can demonstrate that, well, I spend 100% of my time or some majority of my time, or it's a passion of theirs, they can talk to that, then that's important to us. But very few people get that opportunity. 100% of the applicants did not feel that work experience and education levels were appropriate in job postings. They're just like, this is ridiculous. And we see it all day long on LinkedIn with memes and, entry-level job requiring 5 years experience, or, a certification for an entry-level person, but the certification requires 5 years of experience. Things like that, just misalignment because the people posting those and developing those really aren't putting the time into understanding really what's needed or how best to qualify those resources. Job seekers received feedback from hiring organizations when they weren't selected. Again, none of them. Job seekers felt confident in the cybersecurity screening process. Nobody in the study felt that way. And as a job seeker, I also felt that way back in the day. So those were some of the initial responses. Well, then that filters down into what are the findings. So these aren't the conclusions of the study. These are just, all right, so I mentioned we developed these codes. Those codes get narrowed down, and then the codes kind of bubble up these themes to help tell the story. And so here's some of the elements of the story. Absence of a standard for defining cyber job role descriptions and KSAs found in 100% of the responses. So there's a consistent theme. The lack of a standard for defining job roles is also complicit in the misalignment of job-related qualifications. So if I can't define the job well, how can I define the qualifications for doing that job, or even give you an indication of what that job's going to entail if we do hire you? 100% of the participating organizations' entry-level job postings required at least 2 years of experience, reportedly not because they felt that it was necessary, it's because they see everybody else doing it, so they thought it was a standard. Like, it's just normal. So there's a flaw, and also, it goes back to the ignorance in developing the job posting and really defining that role. 0% of participants were familiar with any workforce standard. And so here's some actual quotes from our study. We don't have a good process for how to define cyber roles or qualifying requirements. We usually just Google it, see what's out there, and if we can use it, sounds similar, we go with it. Another one, using standard definitions for different jobs would help me better understand which jobs I qualify for from a hiring or from a job seeker perspective. Some companies post an analyst job, but they really want an engineer, and they're just doing that so they can pay analyst pay for an engineer if they can find someone to apply for those jobs. 3 more themes. 80% of hiring organizations felt their education experience requirements were inaccurate. They're posting it, but they feel that it's inaccurate or misaligned, but they're posting it anyway because they don't know what else to do. 80% of hiring organizations felt that cyber job experience was more valuable and qualifying than education or certification. That actually came out of the ISC2 study from 2021, and that's that stat I mentioned earlier. 90% of all participants felt the cybersecurity degree programs are inconsistent in design and lacked a standard for ensuring consistent requirements for fundamentals that apply to cybersecurity in general. Some quotes related to these 3. Hiring managers stress the need for experience over education, but a lot of the applicants are just out of school and applied despite the requirement for both education and experience. And I think you guys have probably heard that. I applied for, I'm just blindly applying for everything that looks similar because I need a job, and no one's calling me back or telling me why I'm not getting a job. So I'm flooding the market with my resume. The trick and the problem are figuring out what the basic minimum level experience is for the job, which translates into finding the right person with the right skills at the right price. So there's that unicorn concept. And actually, and it might have been this person that I even used the word unicorn in the study. Experience in cyber is important for the role, ensuring we're giving responsibility to someone that isn't seeing it for the first time. So that's where these internships are really important for people going through a structured program, or even those that are learning on their own, homeschooling or just self-learners after high school. We used to be very particular about requiring a degree, but with the inconsistencies among cyber degrees from different schools, we can't count on the degree to provide candidates the basic skills. 4 more, and I think there's just a couple after this. 0% of hiring organizations use an alternative method for screening. Talked about that. 100% of hiring organizations felt the screening process for cyber was ineffective, at finding the right resource. 80% of hiring organizations felt their job postings contained inaccurate, misaligned job descriptions and qualifications that resulted in overlooking an otherwise qualified candidates. They didn't even make it through the filter screening process to be able to talk to a person. 100% of hiring organizations stated that they primarily rely on automated filters to screen applicants. Now, I can tell you it can be overwhelming. We're a small organization, and when we post an analyst or engineer job, we get hundreds of resumes from all over the place. So it does take time. It is an investment in finding the right person. Some quotes from these 4 themes. It's frustrating to see the volumes of resumes submitted for a job, sometimes more than 100, and none of them meet the minimum requirements, the requirements that you'd expect to be standard across the board. We don't currently consider applicants that don't meet the requirements, and as a result, our positions are still unfilled. Some of these people have had job openings for a year that they can't find the right person for. Their process can't find the right person for. The right person's out there. And we don't have an alternative method for screening applicants that aren't a match. We don't have an alternative way to determine if someone that gets filtered out is a good fit. Their resume just never gets to a person. 0% of hiring organizations use an alternative method for screening. 100% of the organizations felt the screening process was ineffective. Wait, I just read that one. Oh, so there was more quotes. I've been an analyst for over 2 years, have a total of 4 years of experience in cyber, but they never called me. I've applied for a lot of the jobs over the years, never heard any feedback, but it would be nice to know what needs improvement, what could I have done or said differently, maybe something on my resume. All right, last 2. 100% of job seeker participants didn't feel confident in the hiring process, specifically the screening process where their credentials are scanned for alignment with what is commonly misaligned job description and minimum qualifications. 80% of participants hiring process did not include a formal analysis of the internal need, or the process didn't seek to align the role objectives submitted by hiring managers with a standard job role definition. I've applied for several entry-level jobs that I'm more than qualified for, that should only require 2 years of experience, but required 5, and no way to discuss my background or capabilities because I was filtered out. Hiring organizations should stop trying to write elaborate descriptions and start listing bullet points of what they need. Remove the experience and degree requirements and actually put the work into interviewing people. Minimum requirements are understandable, but the problem is their minimum is usually too high and doesn't line up with what's required for the job. And I don't think there's a cybersecurity shortage as much as there is an industry problem with aligning the definition of what we need with what's required to be successful in that role. All right, so what are the implications of this? So the relationship between the level of experience required and the level of experience reported by job applicants was found to be both inconsistent, misaligned, as well as overwhelmingly viewed as inaccurate. Second, cybersecurity job experience was valued significantly higher than education, yet both were typically defined as a minimum requirement for entry-level cyber jobs. So if one's more important than the other, then why are you still using it for filtering your job applicants? Both of them for filtering your job applicants. Third, hiring organizations did not have an alternative process for screening applicants that didn't meet minimum qualifications, even though they all agreed that their minimum qualifications were inaccurate. So again, it's just makes the problem worse, and they know it. Lastly, there's a lack of confidence in the hiring process for cyber jobs, beginning with the hiring organization's understanding and definition of the needed role and associated qualifications, and extending to the screening and interviewing of job seeker candidates. So the recommendations based on all of that that I presented in as a result of this study. Number one, we need to implement a standard for defining the cybersecurity workforce using a common language to define job roles and KSAs. Again, KSAs are knowledge, skills, and attributes. And establishing continuity between hiring organizations and job candidates and how they describe their respective expectations and qualifications. If I can use the same language to define the job that I'm hiring for, that the hiring or that the job seekers are using to describe their experience and the language in their resume, then that one-to-one match is going to be much more probable. So part of that, hiring organizations must first implement the standard within their hiring procedures to define the job role, objectives, and KSA. This is the demand. This is what's going to drive a change. If we can get the people that have the jobs, that are posting the descriptions and the requirements for that jobs to adopt a standard, then that is the demand for which higher education develops their programs, because they're measured on success. It's not just that you graduate, it's also that you got a job. And that's very important for community colleges. Community colleges get tax dollars for that. All right, so then if I can translate that from hiring organizations to higher ed, then there's a good percentage of people that are going to college and university to get a cyber degree. And if that degree is lined up with the standard for the language and the expectation of the hiring organizations, then now I am, as a job seeker, or more familiar with and will use that same language. And if I have that framework, and I'll show it to you here in a second, if I have that framework upon which not only do I understand, and this goes back to the awareness piece, it's not just cyber. Here's all the jobs in cyber. As a professor, especially in the intro classes, the intro to cyber, I always ask, what do you want to do in cyber? And a lot of people are like, I don't know. I just heard cyber is what I need to do. Or they have some Hollywood perception of cyber, like I'm going to be a Mr. Robot, or CSI, I want to do forensics and do this stuff. Okay, well, do you understand what's involved with attaining that job? Nope, have no idea. Well, if you're going to be a hacker, that's a long path. That's 5 years. Do you have 5 years? Nope, I need a job tomorrow. Well, that's not the job you're going to start with. All right, so how do I go from tomorrow to the hacker in 5 years? Because maybe they will be a great hacker, but how do they get there? How do we develop that career path for them and the milestones? And those milestones are the training and the knowledge, but also how do I get the experience in this job and the other, so that eventually I can mature into that desired role, and whether it's 5 years or maybe it's a career aspiration, 15, 20 years down the road, I want to be a CISO one day. How do I get there? Well, and the other component of that I'll get to in a second is the mentoring part. But if we can align the job need and the standards with KSAs, improve the screening process, support the internal career development programs, which will become more effective if we have a framework upon which we can measure our own employees. And again, I'll show you that here in a minute. And then on the job seeker side, like I mentioned, raising awareness, aiding in career planning, and aligning my own personal knowledge, skills, and attributes with a given role, not only for today, but also realizing where I want to go. I can map that out and know how I need to grow and what I need to do. Second recommendation, establish an alignment of the standard among hiring organizations, education and training programs, and opportunities for internships and apprenticeships. Higher ed they have to have an outcome that aligns with the standards that translates directly to the jobs at hiring organizations. There has to be that collaboration, creating clarity for job seekers and students regarding cybersecurity jobs and careers. There needs to be that consistent language, and their program needs to be based upon the same KSAs that higher organizations have for the roles that they're hiring for. Second component of that, higher education must create opportunities for students to apply their knowledge through internships and apprenticeships. So that co-op, that internship, it must be a required component for graduation. That's going to force higher ed to go out in the community and establish relationships with companies in their community. And almost every higher ed knows who hires their students. Raytheon, NSA, State Farm, Toyota. They know who hires their students. Go to them and say, we need your help. We need to develop an intern program so that when you do hire our students, it's not day one for them. It's day, they've been here they've worked with you for 300 hours. 300 plus hours is what's required for a college co-op. If you want 3 credit hours, it's 360 or 380 hours that have to be tracked with objectives between the company and the university or college. And so when they graduate that degree, they've already been with you for 300 plus hours. And they've already demonstrated their effectiveness or not. That's a good way to try before you buy, but also gives them feedback about where they need to improve. So that's a great feedback loop and opportunity for job seekers. Lastly, establish mentorship programs through security industry associations based on the NICE framework. So everybody that's in a college program, and a lot of colleges and universities have student chapters of ISSA and ISC squared, or at least ISSA. So get them acclimated. That helps them network. It helps them find someone that can maybe give them some career advice. And some of these organizations actually have mentorship programs. So from those recommendations, and as a result of this study, my conclusions are: the primary root cause and most impactful factor contributing to the workforce deficiency was the absence of a standard from which the workforce can be consistently defined, qualified, and measured across all stakeholders. If we go back to that very first slide, or maybe it's the third slide, that said there's 1 million jobs unfilled and that demand is greater than supply, the takeaway message from this study is that the widely publicized message of the gap can't be verified because of the known and significantly misaligned, inconsistent, and inaccurate definition of job roles. So let's just say, for example, there's 100,000 cyber analyst jobs unfilled and they can't find anybody to hire for those jobs. That might be a statistic, but it's not accurate. It can't be accurate because they've, at least the participants in this study, all agreed that they did not effectively design or define their job description for that analyst role. So who's to say that what you need is even accurate when comparing it to the workforce that's available for a job that you simply got wrong? So there's a ton of analysts out there, but because of the way you wrote your job description and the qualifications you have that you agree is inaccurate, you're not finding the right people from all of those hundreds of thousands that are available. So though it's a message that's consistent and they're basing it on numbers, it's wrong. And most of the literature that I read, all of those studies, 50 plus studies, they made recommendations on how to potentially solve this problem, but they were very pointed solutions. Improve training and education, improve the availability of a program, especially to minorities, improve accessibility, improve diversity, implement staff development, implement competency programs to determine who's improving or who might be a good candidate. But those are just pointed solutions. No one of those on their own is going to solve this problem. So there were no holistic recommendations. So here's my recommendation. There needs to be an ecosystem based upon a standard. And in my opinion, the NICE standard from NIST is the most applicable of all the ones that I reviewed. And again, I reviewed dozens of them. It is the most structured. It's the most applicable, again, from my experience in IT and cyber. When you read this thing, it makes sense. Now, it's still government. It's still a government program. So I think it's overdone. Like a lot of the KSAs, I think could be boiled down into some more generic categories. But nonetheless, any one of you on this call could go through this nice standard, and they've made a website that's fairly easy to navigate. You could go through this framework and see how it directly applies to you, or help someone else do it and see how it applies to them, and how it can be used for career planning and so on. So starting on the left, job seeker can become familiar with the NICE standard. And again, I'll show it to you here in a second. So I can go into the NICE standard, into the 7 job categories. I can review all 7 of them pretty quickly. And within those 7, I can say that's the job role that I want to go for. And you click into that job role, and you figure out what the KSAs are. And what you'll see here in the middle, under NICE standard, you've got the roles, and underneath that, you've got KSAs, and what's in parentheses are the entry level, the intermediate level, and the advanced level. So it tells you the KSAs needed to get the entry level job. And then again, for career planning purposes, how do I get to analyst 2 or analyst 3? Well, there's the intermediate and advanced level KSAs for that role. So those are the things you need to work for if you want to get promoted within that job role. But over on the left, for as far as career path goes, is an example of, all right, I want to be an engineer one day. How do I get to engineer? Well, I'm going to look at the KSAs for engineer and see what jobs I can qualify for today that'll get me to engineer. And so if I work backwards from that, I figure out role 1, maybe it's analyst, role 1, maybe help desk, whatever the case is. And there's the entry level KSAs for that starting milestone. And when I review that same role against where I want to go, what's the translation? How do I migrate? How do I grow and mature from role 1 to role 2 to role 3? I can do my own assessment of that. And I think there's still an opportunity to develop some more analytical, career planning tool that the NICE framework doesn't currently incorporate. But for this purpose, you could do your own work at reviewing the KSAs to help you figure out how to get from role 1 to role 2 to role 3. In higher ed, I can take those roles and KSAs and incorporate them in my degree programs. My associate degree, the objectives and the courses satisfy these KSAs, which qualify graduates for these roles. And in any case, whether it's your associate's, undergraduate, graduate, I can incorporate an intern or apprentice or co-op program so that my students are getting the hands-on opportunity to apply what they're learning. So when they graduate, they can say, I didn't just learn it, I did it somewhere. And then the hiring organizations, which is really where this needs to start, like I mentioned, that's the demand. For all their job descriptions, they go out to NICE and they can just go through the KSAs and say, these are the knowledge, skills, and attributes I need to help my company to fill this gap or to achieve this objective. And from those KSAs, it'll tell me what role that is. And now there's my job description. That approach can also be used for career advancement. Maybe I already have engineers and analysts and help desk people. Well, how do I determine when to promote them? It can't just be because they've been here forever, because they could be here forever and still suck. They're just not bad enough to fire. Or maybe I didn't fire them because I can't find a better person because this whole process is broken. So how do I justify? And this is an HR problem too. It'll actually help HR because you promoted one person and you didn't promote the other. Well, why? Bob's only been here for 2 years and Sue's been here for 5, but you promoted Bob. Well, you now have a standard upon which you can say, well, I promoted Bob because he improved his KSAs from entry level to intermediate. And Sue really, she does a great job, but she's not going out there for additional training or hasn't shown any improvement in certain areas, and so on. All right, so what that looks like. So this is actually the framework. It's easy to look at. So here are the 7 categories. And I'm going to pick analyst because we hire a ton of analysts. So that's down here under protect and defend. So you click into specialty area. Oops. And there's 4 job roles. So analyst, infrastructure support, incident response, vulnerability management. All right, so if I click into analyst, Now I have a brief description. I have the abilities of an analyst. So these are things that you can demonstrate on the job. Here's the knowledge you should know. And again, some of these I think could be rolled up, not those two specifically, but as an example, I think there's some deduplication that can happen here to make it more generic, because there's a lot. You know, just for analysts, there's probably 60 or more here. And it's not to say you have to be 100%, but if I can demonstrate that I have the majority of these capabilities or this knowledge, that I'm more qualified for this role than maybe some others. So it's a good measuring stick. So that's the knowledge I need. This is the book knowledge. This is the course I took. So again, higher ed can now map, or even K-12 these days with junior, senior cyber programs, you know, the CTE, whether it's computer, network, cyber, I can, like your network mapping, that could be a network class. So how do I take my program, high school, college, university, and show that I taught students this, and now I can put this on my resume. However we do that, indicate that is still up in the air. Skills, things I can demonstrate, tasks, things I've done. So maybe a project, internship, research I did. And then here is that entry level, intermediate, advanced. So how do I go from analyst 1 to analyst 2 to analyst 3, or lead engineer? So it's all here. The standard has been developed. I think this is the second or third version of this. It's been around for more than 5 years. And over to the right, related courses, some certifications and courses you can take to help you attain this knowledge and maybe even demonstrate through, because some of these certs like the EC Council, not this one in particular, but like some of the EC Council certifications they're applied. So you actually have to do a lab and demonstrate your understanding and capability. So I'm not saying this is the answer to everything, because I think there's some components missing here, but this, as far as like the true solution, as far as the ecosystem goes, but the standard, it's well thought out. It's fairly well organized, and it's maintained, and it is relied upon in the public sector. So the government, especially DoD, they do rely on this. So when you look at, if you go to usajobs.com and look at some of the cyber jobs, you'll see a lot of the same language, because they have already adopted a consistency in the language for the definition of the role and the qualifications. But we have yet to do that on the private sector side, or really consistently as a whole across North America. And that's all I got. So I appreciate you listening. I hope you're still awake, and happy to answer any questions or have a discussion about any of this.
So if anybody has any questions, please post them in the chat. And then after we allow some time for any questions to come in and get a response to those, we will provide a chapter update to end the meeting.
And someone did post nice conference events. There's a nice conference here in Dallas in the next couple of months. The next one I was invited to is in Utah. I think it's in December. So there's actually some pretty good activity here in just the North Texas area about workforce development, and some collaboration with NICE.
So there's a question from John Edwards. Is there an issue with onboarding processes?
Well, that does vary from organization to organization. I know some that onboarding is just a nightmare. And so depending on the organization, like onboarding for me at UTSA took 3 months. So I was actually a contractor first. And so there, people that work there typically know the loopholes. But there are some aspects of onboarding cyber, like they want to make sure you've got a clean background check. Depending on who you work for, you may need a clearance. Depending on who you work for, you may have to sign some policies and like ethics and things that you may want to have an attorney review before you sign it. Onboarding usually isn't so I've seen it a couple of different ways. Onboarding can take forever, but then even when you're onboarded, when do you start? So there could be a pretty significant gap between having finished all your paperwork and getting a start date. And then there could also be a gap between getting started. And I've heard a lot of people end up just sitting in the desk because no one is there to help get them acclimated and ramped up for the job that they were hired to do. So it can happen at any point once they decide they want to hire you. It can be kind of drawn out at any of those phases.
Okay. We've got
yes. So I see one that our company is expecting new hires to hit the ground running. That's one of the problems. I think that's one of the reasons that companies expect you to have experience is that you've got a pretty good feeling for what's expected of you. All they need to do is teach you about their own systems and give you the access. And access is one of those reasons you might be stuck at your desk, not doing anything for a while. But for the most part, what I've seen quite a bit on the cyber side is they really expect you to come in and start contributing day one.
Okay, we got a question regarding these standards and how they potentially relate to the certifying bodies for degree programs.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Is there any relation between these standards frameworks that you presented and the certifying bodies for the degree programs? Do they look at this, or do they have their own separate kind of standard or view of this?
Yeah, and there's a process for that too, both at the high school level and the higher ed level. So there are these accrediting bodies. At the high school level, it's the state. So you have the TEKS, or the Texas Education. I can't remember what it all stands for, but it is a state approved curriculum. So they may have every high school student has to achieve these 8 courses, and then there's these electives. But the electives have to be again approved by the state. So the loophole there is, as long as you teach the objectives that the state requires, you can add to the class the cyber components. So a lot of what we've done with high schools, and we do have a program where we work with high schools to help align their cyber or their computer curriculum with getting students ready to graduate high school and qualified for entry-level jobs. How do you do that without going back to the state? And that's a long process. If you go, hey, state, I want to implement a new process, that's like 3 years to get the state to approve your design for a new course. So what you do is you take the current catalog of classes and you find the one that is most closely aligned with the objectives you're trying to achieve, and you require the state required minimum as part of the class, but then you're able to add to. And some of those requirements are, I can use a computer. Well, I can achieve that objective by also teaching you how to install different operating systems and become familiar with virtual machines. So there's some loopholes there where you can just augment the state's minimum requirements with the objectives that you want students to graduate with. Well, then I think there's, similar to other industries, pharmaceutical comes to mind. There's a lot of money in textbooks and lab environments, and K-12 is, there's a lot of money in textbooks. And in a lot of cases, those textbooks and those lab environments aren't very effective. Like McGraw-Hill sells a cyber book for high schools, and it's just pictures and hand-holding, and here's the answer, and it doesn't really teach you anything. It gets you familiar with some concepts, but it doesn't make you learn or think on your own. Well, then the lab environment that comes with that textbook is also very expensive. And again, it holds your hand. Do this. And when you do this, here's a screenshot of what you should expect. And here's what you need to type for this other thing. And there's just zero troubleshooting. And so in our approach, in our experience with high schools, not even knowing about the cost at first, just looking at becoming more effective, helping them pick a better textbook. Like if you're going to teach students how to get ready for entry-level cyber jobs, why aren't you teaching them like the Security Plus content to get them ready for the Security Plus certification? And if you're going to teach them towards that objective, why not use the study guide as a textbook like we do in college? It's not a difficult book, and it still has plenty of pictures in it. All right, well then, why don't we use a lab environment that's free or low cost, that's more challenging and more aligned with what they're going to end up doing? Like I push a platform called Immersive Labs. It's free to anybody with a .edu address. And I've also been able to work with, and it's a UK company, but I've been able to work with them to now give high schools free access. It's like 800 or 900 labs, and it's all online, so they don't have to implement anything, and it's free. The last high school we helped implement and align this, we saved them hundreds of thousands of dollars on inexpensive, ineffective textbooks and lab environments. So if we can align not just the accredited requirements, whether it's high school or whatever accrediting body may apply to the college or university you go to, you just have to understand how to customize the minimum requirements so that you can augment it with the objectives that you want to align with. It's going to take a long time to go back to the accrediting body and say, all right, we've got the standard we want to implement across the country. That's a phased approach. That's down the line. But in the interim, I think it would be very easy to go to Collin College as an example and say, we need to go through your degree program and the objectives that you're currently teaching to see how it lines up with these entry-level jobs. And if we can map that and demonstrate it and market it, then there's your value regained in the degree that you just got from that school. So when you go to an employer, say, I graduated from Collin, and I can show how that degree maps to the job you're hiring for. That can be done really quickly.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. What's your view on imposter syndrome? A lot of people, particularly from immigrant communities that are highly skilled and qualified, suffer from these issues. How do people from less represented communities adjust, particularly during the hiring process?
Well, that's difficult with the current problem in the hiring process because a lot of the filters are looking for those credentials. So if you're not as skilled or credentialed, then it doesn't matter who you are as a person or what their problem is as an imposter. But I think when you get to the seasoned hiring managers, they can see that. So for example, if I'm hiring somebody with a master's degree in cyber and every certification under the moon, I'm already a little bit leery. Like they're just out there for the alphabet and they're good at studying and taking tests. I might be curious enough based on their job role experience to have a conversation with them to see what their personality really is. And that's something I'll add too. What you learn and what you can do is just part. And I hope I don't know what to say here. I hope it doesn't come across the wrong way, but I hope also that you can take it not only with a grain of salt, but take it to heart. Especially in smaller organizations like Blackswan, we've only got like 30 employees. I'm not just looking for someone that can do the job well. You have to fit in not only with the rest of our company culture, but any one of us could be interacting with a client or a student or an intern or someone that wants to learn more about something as a mentor or a news agency. So I have to feel comfortable that you're a good fit for the company. And some of our company values are leadership and good communication and collaboration. And so, and we even teach our intern program, you have to read leadership books and do presentations on qualities of leadership that you feel comfortable or strong about and where you want to grow. And those are like if I could hire someone that is just a leader, that is more points to me than any class you could have taken. Because as a leader, you're going to do whatever you can for the team. And a team of leaders is the most effective. And for those of you that know me and the prior companies and the programs, you'll know that I've hired a ton of students with zero experience and given them the opportunity because of the person they are. They've got drive and passion, and they have this ability to do whatever needs to be done and help anybody with anything that they're capable of helping with. Like, I don't know the answer, but let me help you go find the answer. There's not a no. It's a how do we get to yes. And if you can demonstrate that to an employer, the right employer is going to appreciate that. And that's another problem too. I mean, there's a ton of bad companies and bad managers and bad teams. And, some of that you'll see on a resume, bouncing from one job to the other because you haven't found the right one. And a lot of people see that as a key person. But I'm willing to have a conversation with somebody about why did you change jobs so often? Because it is very likely there's not a good fit and they've just been hired into wrong situations. But yeah, we do scrutinize overqualified people. I think if I was out there looking for a job today, people would think I'm overqualified, and that would suck for me.
Yes, thank you, Mike. Thank you all. I know we ran over a little bit. Sorry for that, but thank you all for joining. Have a good rest of your day and good weekend. Thank you all. I know we ran over a little bit. Sorry for that, but thank you all for joining. Have a good rest of your day and good weekend.